Welcome, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to start right about 2 minutes after the hour, so we'll give folks a chance to join in. In the meantime, to start off with something a little fun, you can put an emoji in the chat that matches what is bringing you here. So are you a student, a professor, do you work at a school, are you a professor, what is your background, you work in an organization, or pick your own emoji that matches how you are feeling today. So drop that in the chat as folks are coming in, and then we'll start 2 minutes after the hour. Okay, thank you again, folks, for joining. I am really excited to have everyone here for this session titled Rising to the Moment, Mobilizing Student Power for Immigrant Justice. Really excited to be presenting here and having folks joining us. And I'm also really excited to be joined here by my two co-presenters, Adam and Lou. So before we kick things off, why don't I introduce myself, and I'll also introduce Adam and Lou as well. So Adam, if you want to go to the next slide, and we'll do some introductions. So my name is Jonathan Goldman. I am the executive director of the Student Clinic for Immigrant Justice. We train college students to provide free legal services to immigrants and asylum seekers and to organize for immigrant justice, and really excited to be here. So next, I will turn it over to Adam to introduce himself, and then you can turn it over to Lou as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Saltzman. I'm an assistant professor at Worcester State University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I'm also the director of the Urban Action Institute, and happy to be a partner with SCIJ and happy to be here today. So I'll pass it over to Lou.
Hi, y'all. My name is Luisana. Y'all can just call me Lou. But I'm a student at Brown. I'm a junior studying ethnic studies and Portuguese and Brazilian studies, and I am currently a member of SCIJ. So yeah, that's exciting. I'll throw it back to Jonathan.
Thank you both so much. I'm really looking forward to giving you all the opportunity to hear from both of them later today. But first, just going to start by giving a quick roadmap. Adam, can you go to the roadmap slide? And then we'll talk about what we're going to cover today. And then I'll turn over to Lou for a land acknowledgement, and then we'll dive into things. So we're going to start off by giving a little bit of an overview of where we are right now in this moment in regards to immigration. We're going to talk about the work that the Student Clinic for Immigrant Justice does. We're going to talk about academia's role in immigrant justice and in this moment of mobilizing to meet many of the world's needs. You'll also hear from Lou talking about her experience in this program and what it's like being part of SCIJ. And then we'll talk lastly about how this program can also come to your school and your community. And before going further, though, I'm going to turn it over to Lou, who's going to lead our land acknowledgement for this session.
Yeah, so before we begin, we wanted to take a moment to just reflect on the land that we're currently standing on and the indigenous peoples who are the traditional stewards of these lands. Jonathan is on Pawtucket and Massachusetts land, which it's currently known as Waltham. Adam is on Nipmuc land, what's currently known as Worcester, and I'm on Narragansett land, or what is currently known as Providence. I would also like to name that I'm at Brown University, which is not only on the land of the Narragansett peoples, but it was also built and funded from the labor of enslaved Black Africans. We started our presentation with this acknowledgement because we just have to understand that settler colonialism is the foundation for all other forms of oppression, some of which we will talk about today, like the injustices in our immigration system. So if our conversations and around change and liberation don't begin with indigeneity, then everything we are building will be predicated by falsehoods and incomplete narratives. So we also have to realize that settler colonialism does not exist solely in a historical context, like many assume. It's current and it's abiding, and settler colonialism allows, that exists now, it allows for our harmful systems of immigration and other similar institutions to persist and to flourish. And the tools that settler colonialism has used and continues to use to displace indigenous peoples from their land and erase their histories are now being repurposed to allow for the displacement and erasure of many other communities, especially the immigrant community that we're going to be highlighting today. So that's why land acknowledgement like this one are super important before we begin these conversations. And with that, I will pass it to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Lou, for that. And also thank you for grounding it also within the conversation that we're having today and that connection between migration, land, and colonialism and all those different aspects. So I appreciate you highlighting that. So before going into talking about the why behind what we're doing, the what, what this moment is calling for in regards to justice and just sort of what the whole immigration sphere looks like, we also wanted to get a sense from all of you of some of the feelings that come to mind when you hear immigration, some of the ideas that come to mind, any words that you feel are closely associated for you, just sort of what things come up for you. So Adam, if you want to go to the next slide, and I'm also going to drop this in the chat as well. So if you go to this link, and I'll also put it in the chat too, or you can also text to it, we're going to end up creating a word cloud based on the different things that come to mind for people when they think of immigration and when they think of this moment that we're in right now. Give me 1 second. I'm also going to just post it in the chat, but you can also put that in, or you can even text to that number as well. So I'll give people like 15 more minutes to put in some responses, and you can put in however many you want. So whatever comes to mind for you, and then Adam will show the what we've created. Seeing some words here, people putting challenging, together, hope, hopeful, melting pot. Yeah, some great words there. Yeah, confusing again. Yep, definitely. As we'll talk about the process, very confusing, very challenging. Let's see, we have another word here, another hope again. Yeah, thank you, people, for your responses here and to get just a little bit more sense of what are the feelings that come up for us when we're talking about this. Okay, Adam, do you want to go back to the slides? So one of the issues that we're really going to be centering around today is the issue of representation, of who does and does not have someone helping guide them through the process of applying for immigration. And before diving into that, I'm really interested in hearing from people of what people may know about immigration and representation and how the two relate to each other. Is this something that has a huge impact? Does representation just have, does it matter a little bit? What is the impact that representation has on this process? So Adam, if you want to go to the next slide, and then people want to message in the chat, what percentage of cases do you think without representation? So when someone doesn't have an attorney or legal representative, do people win 70% of their cases, 40% of their cases, something else? What are you feeling is the impact when people have representation? You can drop that in the chat. Okay, we'll give one more moment for people to put their responses there, and then we'll do the big reveal on the next slide. Adam, if you want to go to the next slide. So it's actually way worse than just 70%. When people don't have legal representation, immigration courts deny close to 90% of cases. In some places, it's even worse than that. In Atlanta, Georgia, for example, in their court system, that's closer to 99.9% of cases that end up being denied. And, this isn't just, a few cases here and there that are being denied. Right now, there are about 1.3 million cases that are pending and backlogged in immigration court. So these are over 1 million cases that are being impacted by whether or not someone has representation, and really influences whether or not someone has the ability to win the case. And you may be wondering, why is that the case? Adam, do you want to go to the next slide? So there's really, I think, 4 core reasons that come to mind for me as to why this process has people lose so frequently when they don't have representation. One, we can look to the complex legal procedures and policies and how complex it is to just navigate this process. You also have language barriers that can result in confusion, miscommunication, late applications, missed appointments, just all these different issues that come when there are language barriers. There's also transportation barriers, like being able to get to the immigration court. And if you miss your appointment, that more likely than not means that your case is probably going to be denied. And then there's also financial barriers, whether it's trying to pay for an application fee, or if it's simply the fact that you're not authorized to work, that your case could end up taking years and years before it ends up being heard. And without being able to work and coming to this country often, and more often than not, particularly for asylum seekers with little to no money, trying to figure out how do you navigate this new world that you are living in. But on top of that, it's not just the legal issues that people are facing. Adam, if you want to go to the next slide, in addition to the legal issues, there's also all these other things that you also face as an immigrant in this country. If you are in our schools, there's issues with information about children being shared with ICE, and then families constantly being worried about what happens when you come and pick up your children. There's issues within our communities of immigrants being often forced to bear the brunt of economic recessions, and during the pandemic right now, often being the frontline workers keeping our world moving. There's also issues of surveillance of people with Black and brown skin being targeted through surveillance programs. And then also in our work, whether it's multilingualism being undervalued or services almost exclusively being provided in English. This runs throughout the process that people are feeling. Now, if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, there is some hope here. And that's because with representation, people are about 5 times more likely to win their cases. Sometimes it's even more than that. If someone is detained and they have representation, they're about 10 times more likely to end up succeeding. And the problem, though, is that at least 40%, in some areas it's even higher, don't have representation. So yes, representation has a huge impact, but very few people actually have representation. Now, you may be wondering then, okay, not that many people have representation. Why is that the case? What is causing this? Why can't we try and fix that? So if you want to go to the next slide, Adam. So on the next slide here, so one of the big issues, right, I said before, is that we have about 1.2 million pending immigration cases. And there was a report recently that estimated that we need about 4 times the number of people working on asylum cases to ensure everyone has representation. There's this great statistic that was shared in a presentation that I was in recently with Michelle Pistone, who's also going to be presenting later today, where she was noting how because there's less than 4,000 lawyers representing clients in immigration court, that would mean that there need to be about 300 cases per lawyer to ensure everyone has representation, which is far, far too great. And without any right to representation, there just aren't enough people coming into this field and ensuring people are given that support as they're navigating the immigration system. So, when we really look at, if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, when we look at why representation is so impactful, it's because it provides a pathway for asylum seekers to tell their stories. And when we look at how many cases there are right now, there just aren't enough lawyers there. So we need to think about how can we get more people to help navigate through that process. And if you go to the next slide, Adam, we can also look at how it's not just legal representation that has impact. That's also organizing that has such a large impact. Whether we look to the organizing that's happened to keep DACA in place, whether it's the organizing to have moratoriums on surveillance technology, to bans on school sharing information with ICE, organizing has and continues to work, and we need to think about how do we continue to build up the people who are engaged in this to ensure we can continue to have those sorts of victories. And so that's really where SCIJ comes into this. What our solution is at the Student Clinic for Immigrant Justice is to train students in immigration law and community organizing, and then mobilize them to provide free legal representation to asylum seekers and organize for immigrant justice. And we do this through these 5 steps of partnering with schools, recruiting students, training students, mobilizing them, and then working to transform our immigration system. And we're going to start first by talking about how we actually train students. So the training that we have students go through, if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, the training we have students go through, it's a 13-week, 42-hour intensive immigration law and community organizing training. There's both live online instruction, as well as self-directed and applied learning that students do. And through this process, learn everything from the law to how you actually apply the law, to what kinds of forms exist out there, the process. And we're really focused on trying to make the training as collaborative as possible. So for example, we work with counseling services at both Worcester State and at Brown University, our 2 current partner schools, on ensuring that we could have a trauma-informed training for students and they could have that additional perspective. We also had guest lecturers come in, and that's really part of our idea of thinking about how can we be collaborative as possible on this. And so on this next slide, we're going to show you just one of the many brief clips that we show students during the training program. And so you guys will get some insight into what students are learning. Thank you, Adam, for showing that. So this is just one of the many things that students learn throughout the entire semester. You know, everything from those differences between what is an asylum seeker, a refugee, what are the elements that go into it from a legal standpoint, what is the, how do you work with clients, all those different things. And if you want to go to the next slide here, Adam, we also have just, really an incredible group of students that are part of this program, coming from all different sorts of backgrounds and what they're studying. Almost all the students in our program are multilingual. Most students are themselves immigrants or first-generation Americans. And we're really focused on trying to build a community, having community events, getting to know each other, sharing stories with each other, and also making sure that we have ongoing personal and professional development. So for example, we ended up, we're actually going to be having an upcoming training around how do you apply for law school, what is it like to go to law school, and so giving students those opportunities to really get to not just show up sometimes and sort of feel like it's a side thing that they're a part of, but really feeling like it's a part of a community that is supporting them. After students get trained, after they do that semester training, now they go on to actually working with people who are applying for asylum. And the way that works is that we pair students up with immigration attorneys working on asylum cases, and then students take on that case and take on almost everything that goes into that case. So everything from meeting with the client, to working on their affidavit, which is about the whole story, to completing the I-589, which is the government form to apply for asylum, to helping them do psychological and physical evaluations, to contacting witnesses, to country conditions, all these different parts that students lead on. And all the cases are pro bono cases, and students through that process get support both from us as an organization doing case rounds, doing check-ins, mentoring and support, and then also from the attorney that they're working with and being able to make that connection. And so right now we're partnered with over 12 different partner attorneys and organizations. We're working with 8 asylum seekers from 6 different countries. And then we've also provided support to a variety of other different immigrants that have reached out with questions that come through our office and providing support to them as well. And it's really exciting, not just seeing the impact that we're having, but also hearing amazing feedback from both the students and also the attorneys that we're working with. I've heard from at least 2 attorneys that are like, when can we have students working with us again? Because it's been such a positive experience during this semester. And if you want to go to the next slide, Adam. So like I mentioned before, not only are we training students on the legal side, but also on the organizing side too. And that's because as students work on cases, we also really focus on how can we create intentional relationships with one another? How can we talk with the clients about the issues that they're facing outside of just the legal issues, but just living wherever they are living, connecting with other organizations and figuring out how can we collectively organize around some of these issues. Just yesterday, we submitted testimony for a bill before the Rhode Island legislature. And now we're also really trying to think about how do we go from this next stage of working with clients to now mobilizing together on local level issues impacting them on a daily basis. And then the next thing I want to talk about is how we actually set up this program. So you're probably thinking right now, wow, this is amazing. How does this actually work behind the scenes? So the way that we've made this possible is through 2 really amazing partnerships, one with Brown University and the other with Worcester State University. And at Brown University, we've been working with the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Studies, and at Worcester State University, working with the Urban Action Institute, which Adam leads and you'll hear more about in a little bit. And basically the way this works is we partner with the school and they help provide basically a platform to connect with students, provide support through a work studies position to be focused on supporting the program on the ground in the community. And then also a small membership fee to help us be able to drive this program, cover things like insurance and everything that comes with a program like this. And it's been really amazing to see the ways we've been able to collaborate and have this impact together, working with students and working with the community. So if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, for people who are already just like, wow, this is amazing, I need to reach out to you right away, have our email right there. You can also follow us at SCIJ Immigration on social media. You can sign up for our email newsletter list there at tinyurl.com/SCIJ updates. And you can also visit our website at scijimmigration.org. But to give you guys a little bit more of a perspective of what does this look like on the side of the schools that we partner with and the students that are involved in the program, I want to turn it over to Adam to talk about what it's been like for him and Worcester State University to be a part of this partnership.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. So thanks, Jonathan, for really outlining clearly what SCIJ is and as an organization and what you're doing. And I'm excited to be here today because I can talk about it from another perspective. I can talk about it from the perspective of a university, a faculty member, and also a center director who is really very much focused on trying to create opportunities for students to get engaged in social change opportunities and being part of community organizing work and work that's part of social justice in the community in the broader Worcester area. So part of it, what I'm going to talk about today has to do with the technicalities of how this partnership worked. But what I really want to focus on is how I am and how we at the university are kind of seeing this opportunity, what it means to us, and the implications that opportunities like this have for the way that we can think about service learning, experiential learning, and expand some of our assumptions or ideas about what it means to do that kind of work. But before I go into that, I want to hear or invite you to share, just in the chat, your idea of what student leadership looks like. It could be a word or a sentence, whatever, but just share something about what student leadership means to you on your campus or in your life. We'll take just like 2 minutes for people to formulate their thoughts and put it into the chat. And we recognize that it can mean vastly different things. It's one of those terms that is paraded around and used a lot in university discussions, academic discussions, strategic planning. What does it mean to us, and what does it mean to you individually? Just take about 1 more minute. So we see some stuff coming through the chat. It could mean student council, student government, playing a leadership role in a club or being in a club. Does it mean anything else? All right, well, feel free to add something in there. I'm going to move forward, but I appreciate this mention of student councils and club presidents because I think that's an idea that we often share. But we can see that the idea of student leadership can be expanded significantly from there to think about the myriad ways that students are organizing, that they are taking a stand on their campus on a number of different causes, and whether they're engaging in service. I see here we have some more stuff coming in the chat. Various ways of being involved on campus, being part of making campus an inclusive space. One of my students is the student member of the board of trustees, and takes that role, extremely seriously as a voice for students. So what I want you to keep in mind is, in the following description of how we see this partnership, what does student leadership look like in terms of this partnership? How does it maybe expand what we're thinking, or fit within these categories that we already have? So the other thing that I want to recognize is that there is a moral imperative for universities to get involved on issues like this, social justice issues. And there are kind of 4 main reasons for this that I want to outline. And these things are not perhaps surprising to most of you, but I think that they're worth mentioning because for me personally, as somebody who is thinking about getting involved with a partnership like this, these were all kind of at the forefront of my mind, right? So the first is that universities have not been spaces that are outside of or immune to the kinds of injustices that are prevalent in our society. More than that, they've often played a direct role in perpetuating injustices, right? We don't have to look further than segregation to see, one of the most widespread and common examples of that. More recently, there are public universities that have not allowed undocumented students without legal status to attend at all. And there are other schools that, as they navigate the question of legal status, have treated undocumented students more as international students, asking them to pay a significant amount more. And that's maybe less of these are less university decisions and more at the public level, legislation that has to do with the state. Nevertheless, this is just a way of explaining and showing the way that universities are enmeshed in the kinds of injustices that have marginalized or created sets of constraints in the lives of immigrants, and particularly undocumented migrants or folks seeking asylum. And and there are a number of other ways as well that we could go into, but just want to highlight that briefly. The second thing that I want to point out is that universities are also not isolated on a hill, the elite spaces that are outside of communities, right? They are part of communities. They are urban institutions if they're in urban spaces. They are hosts to urban residents who are students, and they are public, in my case, members of a city, and therefore enmeshed in city politics and the struggle for equality and belonging that we can see in cities, and therefore have a role to play, whether they're public or not. And then finally, number three, universities purport to uphold specific values, right? They are what Tudor calls sites of democratic education, spaces where students go to get not only an education on the specific topic in which they're interested, but they are exposed to our highest, ideally our highest sets of values as a society, right? So that's another kind of reason for universities to take a stand on issues around social justice, right? As a way of illustrating, demonstrating a commitment to those values. And then finally, as spaces of knowledge and learning, universities are places where students should be exposed not only to the technical knowledge that we find in textbooks, but the kinds of learning that happen through doing, right? And that's the next thing that leads to the next thing that I would like to talk about, which is how we think of experiential learning and service learning when it comes to social justice. So, sorry, I'm just realizing I've lost some notes here. 1 second. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start to talk about, tell a story, I guess, and talk about what this idea of education as commons means. So this is somebody named Jane Addams that some of you might be familiar with, was an activist in the late 19th century, and she founded the Hull House in 1889 as a settlement house in Chicago to serve communities of newly arrived immigrants who were performing precarious wage labor. We often hear about the tens of millions of immigrants who moved to our urban spaces during this time period and were exposed to horrific labor conditions. So as in one part, as a response to that, Addams founded the Hull House as a space of education, a space to provide resources. And she was also a sociologist. She was a matriarch in the discipline of sociology, which is my discipline. But we can also see her as one of the founders of what we think of as service learning today. She and her collaborators offered programs for English language learners, for example, to practice English. But there was more of a sense of sharing and mutually building knowledge together for folks who were from more settled populations, as well as newly arrived immigrants. So we can see the work that she was doing as a pillar of service learning, and as one of the founders of service learning, and that the kind of service learning that she did, and when we think about the way that she did her work, we can see it not just as a concept that originates in the university, but in the community itself, that comes where the learning and knowledge comes from the community, and the programming comes from the community as well, from the needs and demands of the community. And her example also shows that when we think about the origins of service learning, that it was a feminist practice as well, and embraced ideas of community struggle, worker organizing, and challenges to patriarchal, racist, and xenophobic structures of power. So, it's important to frame it this way because, that I'm trying to come from to pose questions like this, right? Where I'm wondering what would service learning or experiential learning look like today if it was led first and foremost by commitment to transformative change, and not necessarily something that we think of first and foremost as a university program, right? And so along those lines, Addams is credited with the quote, "The good that we secure for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secured for all of us and incorporated into our common life." And so I think this is important because she's talking, in a sense, about an idea of collective liberation, right? It kind of makes us think about that famous quote that's been attributed to Lilla Watson: if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And this brings us to the idea of education as the practice of freedom, right? Which is something that Paulo Freire, who's the father of popular education, describes as the means by which we, quote, deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of our world. So knowledge, as in Freire's perspective, becomes democratic when it is co-produced by those with direct lived experience with the social problem under question. So taking it back to the topic of experiential learning and service learning, the practice of this kind of learning can be about a kind of liberation, or can be liberatory in a sense, but not in the sense that students are acting as liberators, but rather working together with faculty and community members towards a kind of collective dignity, belonging, and the dismantling of unjust social systems. So is that what we're doing here with SCIJ and this partnership? I don't know. Honestly, I mean, it's too early to tell. But what I do see is a growing number of students at our university who are committed to tearing apart a broken immigration system, one case at a time, while positioning themselves as allies alongside community organizers and organizations who are struggling for immigrant justice. And though I can't really speak for all of our students, it seems clear to me that we are in this because we can't call our society free and democratic as long as we are subjecting asylum seekers to inhumane treatment. So I just wanted to outline that way of thinking about service learning, whether or not it challenges the way that you might be thinking about it, or the kind of ways of envisioning student leadership. But that's the way that we're approaching it, and the way that we see this opportunity with SCIJ. So from a very technical perspective, this is a way of looking at how we've formulated this partnership with SCIJ, how it fits into our existing programs, as well as some of the ways that we've tried to or are envisioning creating new curriculum to house this partnership. Right. So this project really sits among the work that my center, the Urban Action Institute, does around experiential learning. It gels with the pre-law programs that we have at Worcester State University. We have 2 pre-law minors, one through philosophy and one through poli-sci and history. And then it also dovetails with social justice student organizations in terms of the membership of those clubs getting involved, advertising events, and the overlap between those clubs and who's participating in the trainings and doing this SCIJ work. From a curricular perspective, you can see on the other side here, we are offering a number of different ways for students to get involved. So whether that's an independent study or an internship, ultimately envisioning a clinic credit next year as part of the pre-law minor, and then the possibility of a multidisciplinary co-taught full credit course that is linked to the training that students get to participate in SCIJ. So I guess as the last slide in my piece here, I encourage you to think about and reflect on what student leadership means to you. And now, as I end, what I would like to do is ask you in the chat to think practically. Okay, imagine hypothetically if you were going to get a program like this going at your university. What is one office or department at your institution that could be a great partner for SCIJ, whether it's a center and a part of the administration or faculty or an academic department? But then as well, what do you see as one of the biggest challenges to trying to establish something like this? And we can talk about it for a minute or two. But I'm going to give 2 or 3 minutes for this. I'm not sure, but it seems like it takes some time for things to pop up in the chat, I've noticed. So just sit tight and please feel free to think about this like practically and hypothetically. How would this potentially work in your university? Or feel free to say it wouldn't, and why, because I think that those are important grounds for discussion as well. We'll just give it a second here. I can say just briefly while people are perhaps writing entries that there was no foundation or frame for anything like this at Worcester State University, and so this was really just Jonathan and I talking, having conversations over about a year, and then me taking this multiple times to the office of my university president, pitching it, and then just trying to move forward. And I'll be totally honest with you. You know, I don't know if it's just being at a public university or any kind of university. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of tape to get through, red tape. But I think if we had waited for everything to pass through, campus curriculum governance and things like that, to fully institutionalize this before getting started, I think we'd still be waiting. But whether it's a good practice or not, Jonathan and I just decided to go ahead and recruit students and offer the training. And I had a really solid group of faculty that I was working with, who, including faculty in the departments that house these pre-law minors, who were helped advertise this among their students and give their students credit for participating. And what that did was really show the university, first of all, hey, we're doing this right now. And B, it's amazing. You should embrace this, get on board. And then C, it encouraged the university to sign an MOU with SCIJ. And this is pushing forward some of the other structural pieces as well. So I think I encourage you to think through on your own or drop in the chat, how you could see this happening in your university. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to pass it over to Lou.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Of course, the moment you have been waiting for, why does this matter to students, is what I'll be talking about, since I am a student and part of the program. So this whole little picture is just like all of us in the program. We look great. That was just the point of the picture. You can go to the next slide, Adam. Okay, so in the chat, y'all can brainstorm this as well, since we've noticed there is a little delay. But what did you want to be when you were little, and what do you do now, if you're working now, or what do you want to be now if you're like a student or still studying? It could be as simple as like astronaut, lawyer. So you wanted to be an astronaut when you were little, and now you want to be a lawyer. So I also welcome Jonathan and Adam to put that in the chat because I'm curious. But as that's coming in, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm even asking this. So I think I'm one of the most indecisive people you will ever meet. Like, so indecisive. I think I went through the entire alphabet when I was younger, picking a career or a possible career. I went from astronaut to actress to dancer to I don't even know. But that has followed me all the way up to adulthood. I am 20 years old, and I still kind of have no idea what I want to do with my life. And that is when, this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but I genuinely think that SCIJ came at just the right time to help me figure out what I wanted to do, especially since I'm a junior. So yeah, there is definitely 3 big ways that SCIJ helped me. So the first one being going beyond what I learned in the classroom. The second one, explore and choose a future career path. And the third one, develop new skills and pursue personal goals. So I will get into that. But just wanted to point out all of these fun little comments in the chat. Jonathan wanted to be an actor, a chef, or a train conductor. Adam, architect to professor. Amber, lawyer to career educator. Okay. I love these. Awesome. So before I talk about the big three, I wanted to talk a little bit about what drew me into SCIJ in the first place. I made this little animation thing. I think it's adorable. If you don't think it's adorable, don't tell me. It'll hurt my feelings. But that's me as a little kid, and that's SCIJ. And as cheesy as it sounds, I genuinely do think it was like a love at first sight type of thing. So little backstory, when I was a junior and I was lost. I had no idea what to do with my life, and I still kind of don't, but it's gotten better. But I saw SCIJ come up in one of our like newsletters, and I never ever read them. I never read them because there's so many words in those newsletters. So I was like, I'm not reading this. But then for some reason, like I was like, I'm going to click on this one and I'm going to read it because it just sounded interesting. And I think immigration, just that word, I had not seen as an activity at Brown before. And I was like, that's actually so out there. I had never seen it before. I want to try it. So then I clicked it and I read it and I applied, and I was like, and it also said no experience necessary. But you know those things that are like no experience necessary, and then you need like 7 years of coding to get it. Like I was like, I'm not gonna get it. I'm inexperienced. I have no, like, my only experience is like my own life because I'm an immigrant. And then I ended up interviewing with Jonathan, and it was great, and I got it, and I was so excited. And yeah, it was basically a very cheesy rom-com love at first sight moment. Because I had never just had this experience where I was able to see my identity in an extracurricular activity and actually like do things for my community in an extracurricular activity in this way. So yes, that is my little how I joined SCIJ. And then I'm going to go into the three big ways that it has helped me. The first one being going beyond the classroom, which I think is super, super huge. So essentially, the three big ways is applying the knowledge I learned in the classrooms, greater understanding of abstract concepts, and learning topics that are not being taught in courses. So applying knowledge is like really, really big. I think it's honestly something that I wouldn't have had experience in until I got into like law school maybe, or like an internship perhaps. But it's just like seeing all of this stuff in the classroom and learning it is very different from actually like doing it and actually writing an affidavit and actually talking with a client. So it just gives you that practical experience, and it goes beyond just like learning about it, because I do think that there's definitely a difference between talking in a classroom about talking with a client and actually talking with a client. Greater understanding of abstract concepts is also so huge, because coming from someone, okay, so you know how sometimes there's like words and you're like, I can tell you probably that it fits in sentences, but I don't really know what it means. Like I asked you to define it, you would be like, so that's like me with like everything, but more specifically, like for example, like asylum seeker, I could probably tell you, like use it correctly in a sentence before, but I couldn't really tell you what like it entailed, or like who qualified an asylum seeker, or what the difference between asylum and refugees were. And so like there's these concepts that we learn about in our classes that like we kind of know in theory, but we don't actually know what goes into them and like what their actual definitions are. And I think that's huge thing that helps me in SCIJ to figure out and kind of understand these huge things that you're not able to unless you actually get experience with them. And then finally, learning topics that are not being taught in courses. I'm a college student. I don't have time to learn every interest I've ever wanted to. If I did, I would be like a genius. But so like I was super interested in immigration, but I just did not have time to take courses in immigration, or I just did not have any courses available at Brown on immigration. So having this like separate outlet to learn about all of this stuff was super helpful, because now I could channel my interest into this thing without kind of taking away courses or requirements that I had to take for just my major itself. So yeah, and then the next big way it helped me was potential career paths. That picture is a great representation of what my brain does when you try to ask me what I'm going to do when I graduate. But yeah, so it helps me with this practical experience working in law. Like I mentioned, like you don't really know, like the stuff in the movies looks cool, but my sister's a lawyer, and so I know that it's not actually all of the stuff in the movies. So having that experience with like actually writing affidavits and working with an attorney and seeing what this law sphere kind of entails gives a lot of us a greater understanding of like what this job actually is, and not just like fantasize about this amazing, super cool, I'm going to go to the Supreme Court type experience, and actually, okay, this is how I'm going to help people every single day. And then it also, if you don't want to go into like actual law, it has helped me explore like careers in organizing and activism. So like Jonathan was saying, like we do things past just like working with clients themselves. And so if you see yourself like, oh, I'm super passionate about immigration, but I don't want to be a lawyer, you can pursue a career in organizing and activism and all of this other stuff, and it gives you experience in that as well. And then the last one, which is huge, it helps me discover where my true interests lie before I graduate. Because like I said, I literally have no idea all the time what I'm doing with my life. But SCIJ has kind of helped me like gain this experience and be like, okay, I can solidly say I want to study for the LSAT now, and I can solidly say that I actually want to spend my time and money in law school before like just going in on it, like into law school on a whim and being like, no, I don't want to be here, and then that's like $60,000 down the drain. So yeah, and then the final big thing that SCIJ has helped me with is skills and personal goals. The skills, there's a lot of them, but I think the ones that stood out the most to me were things like translation experience. Like Jonathan says, a lot of us are multilingual. So I've had experience with like a client who only speaks Spanish, and so we have to deal with that. Preparing legal documents, which like that's going to help me even if I don't go into law, because everyone has to do legal documents at some point. Creating an affidavit, which is what I'm doing now. Conducting interviews, especially with people who have undergone trauma, which is really big in this sphere. And that's like very, very different from conducting an interview with just like anyone else. Creating country reports, working with professional attorneys, like all of this stuff that you wouldn't really get experience in unless you went to law school or unless you did a specific internship. But that's what SCIJ like helped me with skills wise. And then it just helped me develop my personal goals. Like engaging in immigration activism. I'm super, super passionate about it, being an immigrant myself. And I just have never found a way to put that energy into like a productive thing, because it is hard to create change as one person, as one 20-year-old. So like having an organization where you can actually channel this energy into is super, super amazing. And then developing organizing strategies as well as giving back to my community. So like I was saying, like I've given back to my communities a ton, but this is like the first time where I actually see my community as a place that I can give back to and have this opportunity to give back to my own community, and use my privilege as a documented immigrant to help undocumented immigrants. And then the final one is working toward individual and systemic change at the same time, because that's so huge. I think I'm an ethnic studies major, so I'm super big on systemic change and how like there's so many problems with our systems. But I also have to step back and recognize that like, yes, I do want to work to change all of these problems in our country and in the world, but also there are people who need help right now, and there are ways to help them right now. So being able to do both of those at the same time has been super, super rewarding and super just powerful, I think, in the work that SCIJ has been doing. But yeah, that's basically why students would really like this program. And I'll throw it back to Jonathan to tell you more.
Thank you so much, Lou, and also thank you, Adam, for before as well. I mean, as you can hear, you know, the people who are part of this community are amazing, and it really has been such a privilege to be able to make those connections. And it's exciting for me because of the impact that we're having, but also that community that we're building as well. And I'm sure now you're wondering, okay, so what does this actually look like to work with SCIJ and for us to partner? So Adam, if you want to go to the next slide. So when we're looking for somewhere to partner with, we look to 5 really clear things. One, we're looking for places where there's a clear demonstrable need. This doesn't mean it has to be, the New York Cities or, Los Angeles. It doesn't have to be the biggest city in the world. Providence and Worcester that we're in right now are sort of in the in-between area. But we want to make sure that there truly is that need, and the community is showing that there is that need and asking for support there too. The second is there needs to be a school there that we can work with and be able to train students. The third is having a network of attorneys and organizations that we can support and partner with and pair students up with. It doesn't need to be a squadron of attorneys. There can just be, a couple of attorneys that we can pair up with. But we're really focused on thinking about how do we build on that ecosystem of people who are on the front lines doing this work already. And so that's something that we're also looking to as well. The fourth part, and this is something that we're stressing even more so in the second year, is really wanting to have community buy-in and support prior to partnering with the school. So we really want to see, is the community and our community organizations that are closest to the ground, working with people right now in a community, are they saying this is something we need help with? We need more people engaged in this. We need that sort of support. And that's something that we want to know as well, because as we've talked about time and time again, we have this community connection in the way that we're doing the work. And so we want to know that there is also that buy-in and that desire from the community. And then the last part is about school support. So we want to know that if you are a professor who is really excited about this, or your administrator is really excited about this, we want to know there's also students really excited about this. And same thing, if you're a student who's really excited, we want to know that there's also administrators or a faculty member or someone else who can also be a partner for this to ensure that there is a long-term stability to this program, whether students graduate or administrators or faculty members leave. We want to know that there is a shared interest throughout the school community to have us come to the campus. So the way that it actually works when we partner with the school, schools, as I mentioned before, there's a membership fee that they have as being a part of the program, dedicating a work-study position or something equivalent to help support the program on the ground, to do things like talk with community organizations, figuring out how we can do referrals, talking about ways to organize students and involve them in local organizing issues. And then also collaborating on projects. For example, Adam being here as part of this presentation. We did a presentation a week or two ago with Seth from Brown and the President's Alliance. And then the last part here is also having space where students can meet with clients. So right now that hasn't been an issue at all because everything has been remote, but in a post-pandemic world, we want to make sure there's somewhere where students can be talking with clients, whether on the phone or in person, and not having to worry about, roommates overhearing, or just being able to be in a private space and having those conversations. And then from that, SCIJ does all the other programmatic things, from training students to pairing them up with attorneys and overseeing that work, to helping set up different organizing campaigns, and also doing a lot of that long-term work of thinking about how do we create a community among students, how do we invest in cross-campus collaborative projects, how do we have those ongoing professional and personal development opportunities, and then also thinking about how can we have an impact beyond just the students that we're training as well, other internship and volunteer opportunities. So there's students both at Worcester and at Brown who weren't able to be a part of the training program, but have continued to be involved in this work, and that really shows how we're invested in having that widespread impact. If you want to go to the next slide. So, and as I'm going through this slide, if people want to drop any questions they may have in the chat, and we will get to those at the end here as well. But you may be wondering, okay, so what exactly does this process look like? So there's sort of two different pathways that we look at when people reach out to us. So the first is if you are someone from an organization, if you happen to be an attorney, or you're from the community in some way, and you can reach out to us and say, hey, this sounds really awesome. We would love to bring this program to our school. And so we'll say, this is awesome. It looks like this is a community that sort of fits what we're looking for. And then we'll work with you to sort of see, what schools in the community might be good to connect with. And then also work with you to begin, talking to organizations in the community to understand, is there that interest? What are people feeling on the ground? Is this where support is needed? And assuming that there's that interest from one of the schools in the community or from the school in the community, and there's also support from the community as well, then we'll work together to build up support, drum up interest, and work to finalizing that. And then on the flip side, if you're a student, a faculty member, an administrator that reaches out to us, then it'll be sort of similar. We'll also work to build that community support. And then also, depending on who reaches out to us, we'll want to see, is there also interest from faculty administration? Is there also interest from students? And assuming all of that's the case, we'll work together on finalizing that partnership and making this happen. And so our goal for this upcoming fall is to expand to at least 2 additional schools, and really thinking about how do we continue to expand this impact and what has been, I think, even more successful of a first year than we could have expected. As Adam said, we went into this in the middle of a pandemic, being unsure of how things would play out, being unsure what it would look like, of all the stresses that students are balancing, and have still managed to have this impact in this first year. So if you want to go to the last slide then here. So, for people who are interested in connecting with us, you can reach us via email. Our emails are here on the slide. You can also learn more by visiting either one of our websites. You can visit SCIJimmigration.org. You can also learn more about the Urban Action Institute, which we're partnered with, that Adam leads at Worcester. You can visit their website at worcester.edu/UAI. And then you can also please follow us on social media as well. You can stay up to date with the work that we're doing. You can follow SCIJ on all of our immigration channels. It's SCIJimmigration.org. And you can find the Worcester, the UAI on Facebook at Worcester State UAI. And I'm also going to drop our social medias in the chat as well. So if you want to easily follow those here too. But to close out here, we'll give people an opportunity. If there's any questions that people want to post, I'll give people a minute or two to drop some questions. We'll answer those and then we'll close out. So any questions that people are having? As people are putting questions in there, one of the most common questions that I often get in this work is A, can undergrads really do this? And B, how are undergrads able to do this? So the first thing that I would point to is the feedback that we've gotten from attorneys that students are working with has been phenomenal. From some attorneys being like, hey, are there more students you guys have trained that we can take on right now, to people offering opportunities for students to work with them over the summer. We have one student who's been asked to work with the attorney after she graduates. So it's even just really positive feedback from the attorney showing that this is totally something that students are capable of. And the way that this is possible, the way that students can do all of this, is through these partnerships that we do with attorneys. By having attorneys overseeing students and providing that support, students basically are working as though they're paralegals under the supervision of these attorneys and can take on the bulk of that work that goes into those cases. And that's really what makes this possible and makes this program feasible as well. So it's been really exciting. And I don't know, Lou, if you want to add anything about what your experience has been so far working on the case that you've been doing and what your experience has been too.
Yeah, sure. I think that it does sound very intimidating at first because you're like, I have to do things that literally a lawyer who has years of experience has to do. But I do think that it the way that SCIJ is set up has been very, very helpful, I think, in kind of battling that, because not only you're working with an attorney, you're also partnered with another student. So you're never kind of just like going into it on your own and like are unsure. Like you can always bounce off ideas with this one person or work on it together, do interviews together as well. And then like besides that, we also have things like Jonathan mentioned, like case rounds, where we discuss it with like all of the other students in the program, and like there's like open hours where we can ask like other people with like more knowledge on the subject if we have any questions regarding that as well. So I honestly think like, though it sounds very intimidating, like we can do it, and like the work that we're doing is like things I think that like should not slow down the asylum process. Like I'm writing an affidavit right now, which is like super important, but also like the fact that like the lawyer that I'm working with has to do this on her own for so many other people, when me and my partner are doing it like on our own for the most part. I think like it just highlights how like putting undergrads into this work is so beneficial and so productive, because we can like handle the stuff that like lawyers don't need to spend that much time on, because we're able to do that. And then like that's going to speed up the process of asylum in general. So yeah, that's my input.
Yeah, thank you for noting on that. I think you hit it right on as well. There's a quote that I meant to share earlier, which I'm see if I can find right now, but it's something along the lines basically that when someone does or does not have representation, it doesn't change the facts of the case. But when someone has representation, what it does do is it changes the power dynamics that are involved. It changes the knowledge dynamics that are involved. And so that's really why representation is so important. Like getting people involved in this is so important. The facts don't change whether or not Lou is working with a client that they're working with. What does change is, this person having someone, giving them the confidence to understand it, helping them understand what is expected that may not be readily available to someone who doesn't understand that system, helping provide a platform to say, you're not going to be alone in this process. That has such a huge impact. And I think with that, we'll close out. We'll stick around if people have any final questions here, but otherwise, thank you to everyone who's joined. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of the exchange. And if you have any questions, we'll stick around and you can drop those in the chat too.